This is Michael Popok, and you know what time it is. Legal AF After Dark. The world's turned upside down with United States Supreme Court justices with upside down flags, writing decisions that leave the Voting Rights Act in tatters at their feet. Now we got a new decision written by who else? The flag-flying insurrectionist Sam Alito, who goes after South Carolina and decides that everything's okay when you take 62% of the black people and move them from one district to another in order to make that district blacker and the other district whiter. We used to call that bleaching black votes, which is a bad thing. It's usually called racial gerrymandering, but not to the United States Supreme Court, who now says in a new Supreme Court ruling that we discuss on Legal AF that all is fair in love and racial gerrymandering as long as you make the assumption that the state house, usually controlled by white people in the South, is doing the right thing. And they're only doing it for partisan purposes. They just want to see more Republicans. They're not trying to get at the black people. Really? We break it all down for you on Legal AF. Take a listen.
Popok. I want to talk, though, about this decision end of last week, 6-3 decision by the United States Supreme Court. Look, it's fairly easy to condemn and criticize Justice Alito and Clarence Thomas and, specifically Justice Alito. And Clarence Thomas this week, Justice Alito, although Clarence Thomas and his concurring opinion to this ruling, talking about how critical he was of Brown v. Board of Education, which struck down the separate but equal policy. I would put worse than hanging the flags of the inverted flag and then the right-wing extremist appeal to heaven flag. But look, Justice Alito seems to identify, let's just say he identifies with insurrectionists, the turning the United States of America into a theocracy. I'm not using hyperbole. This is what Justice Alito wants to turn the United States of America into. He's been clear about it. He gives speeches abroad where he talks about these concepts. He wants to eliminate the separation of church and state, but utilizes the First Amendment to basically say, everybody has a free speech right to discriminate against each other, and laws that stop discrimination would be discriminatory against religions. And so that's who Justice Alito is. But we've got this decision right here in Alexander v. South Carolina, 6-3 decision where the Supreme Court says it was the right-wing Supreme Court, the 6 right-wing justices, the 3 they liberal, but I don't like this terminology anymore. The 3 justices who were appointed by Democratic administrations, Democratic presidents who want to uphold the law were in the dissent, and the majority of the court upheld the South Carolina legislature's racist gerrymandering that removed 30,000 voters from the 1st congressional district, 30,000 black voters from the 1st congressional district, and moved them into other districts so that the 1st congressional district, controlled by MAGA Republican Nancy Mace, stays a safe MAGA Republican seat by shifting where black voters are able to vote and that they can vote in the 1st congressional district. Now, the state legislature said that they are permitted to engage in political gerrymandering. They're not allowed to, the Voting Rights Act prevents it from being racist gerrymandering. But they said, look, this was just being political, and it just so happens that when we politically gerrymandered, 30,000 black voters were taken out of this specific district and disenfranchised from voting in the 1st congressional district. Now, there was a full trial. The way we talk about, the Trump criminal trial, there was a full, civil trial before a 3-judge panel, because these Voting Rights Act challenge cases go before 3-judge federal panels. And in a unanimous 3-0 decision, the 3-judge panel said they heard all of this evidence about how the legislature, the staffers were looking at the race of people, and they were focused on racist criteria. And they said, look, the evidence is overwhelming that what was intended here was racist gerrymandering. And you're just saying that it was political gerrymandering as a pretext for what you really were designed to do, which was overwhelmingly be racist and disenfranchise black voters. So anyway, this went up to the United States Supreme Court, and Justice Alito, he reached the conclusion and said, well, actually, the district court that heard a whole trial, you're wrong. You need to just believe at face value what the legislature said. And if they said it was political, that should end the inquiry. This is what is exactly in the ruling. You did not credit that there could be good faith intentions, and you attributed bad faith to the legislature, and you should have attributed good faith to the legislature and just believed them when they said it was political in nature and not racist in nature. So now the South Carolina district is subject to this racist gerrymandering for good now until the next census. But Popok, I'll throw it over to you. More significantly, what Justice Alito did here was give a roadmap to other state legislatures on how to do racist gerrymandering, violate the Voting Rights Act, but now just follow Alito's guidance and say, look, this is our good faith view. It's political. And so, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the flags, but the flags are
all right, well, we'll pick it up.
Symbolic of who these people are, and this right-wing theocratic racist regime that we are. Oh, and then in the concurring opinion, you got Clarence Thomas, who says, and what we can't do is act the way the 9-0 Supreme Court did. He criticized Brown v. Board of Education, which overruled separate but equal and ushered in the civil rights movement. And Justice Thomas, who's a black justice, said that the Supreme Court exercised too much extraordinary powers in Brown v. Board and should not, and it was a judicial overreach in Brown v. Board of Education. That's what Clarence Thomas is saying. That's the ruling. I just report on it. Michael Popok.
Patreon.com/legalafs. Good night, everybody. Let me see what I can pick up with. The bleaching of African-American voters continues in the South, and it's condoned by the MAGA Supreme Court. You kept saying 30,000 people were transferred. It's worse than that, the numbers. 62% of black voters that were in the 1st district were transferred to Clybourne's 6th district, making it even blacker. Her district even whiter. And then we don't have another African-American majority district in South Carolina, and we don't have a congressional map that matches the census in terms of power, and we have disenfranchisement. And once again, the Voting Rights Act lies in tatters at the feet of this particular Supreme Court. And if you don't think voting matters, elections matter, 6-3, and a concurrence, as you said, by Clarence Thomas, that hates affirmative action, although he was the product of it. He hates anything that relates to the Voting Rights Act and helping black people. You know, there was a legacy that he was supposed to fulfill in replacing, at least indirectly, the great Thurgood Marshall, and he's just failed at every term. And then you've got the week that we find out that Alito is a closeted insurrectionist who literally flies the flag of the anti-democracy movement to try to have Trump steal the election in 2 of his houses, one being sort of near me in Long Beach Island, New Jersey. He's a former, people forget where he came from. He wasn't hatched out of an egg or landed from another planet, although at times I think he has. He was a New Jersey Supreme Court justice before he was picked to be on the United States Supreme Court. And just waiting and lying in wait with Clarence Thomas until he got enough numbers in order to do what he's doing here, which is to insert judicial templates and decision-making rules that are not anywhere in the Constitution, which is what they love to do when they do judicial activism. When you hear them not talking about the record, these right wing, not talking about the facts below. Run for the hills, because all you're going to see now is just an unmoored Supreme Court that's just going to do legislation from the bench about what they would like to see happen, having nothing to do with the record below. As you said, when you have a 3-judge panel in South Carolina, the deepest part of the South, okay, who come up with after hearing, and the way these cases work on districting or redistricting off of census is that you hire experts and they do empirical studies and they give variations on a theme of maps that could be generated by a partisan but not racist state legislature. And they go through, it's almost like Stratomatic, where they just run the permutations over and over again by a computer, and they basically say it's a statistical impossibility for them to have come up with this map and transferred 62% of the black people out of this district if it wasn't for racial gerrymandering and the bleaching of African American voters, which means you are disenfranchising them, which is exactly the thing the Voting Rights Act and many of the constitutional amendments that came out of the Reconstruction era were meant to avoid. But this Supreme Court has completely chipped away at the Voting Rights Act, which was signed into law by Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats back in the 60s. It's one of the great society things that Lyndon Johnson accomplished in his one term, much like Joe Biden is accomplishing so much in his one term and will go down equally with Lyndon Johnson as being a great president, especially when it comes to domestic policy. Same thing for Joe. Then did it shock anybody that this bookend imagery that we have of Alito writing this allowing, as you said, giving license and permission for future racial gerrymandering, and you just call it partisan? And you can just say, well, it's not our fault that all the Republicans happen to be white in our state. That's not why we're doing it. We don't care about white supremacy. We care about we're in control in the House. So in the Republic, so we want all Republicans. Is that really what you're doing? Not when the empirical data says that it's impossible for you to have come up with that map, except for trying to disenfranchise and dilute the power of the vote of black voters in your state and therefore disenfranchise them. Now, I had a little bit of hope because last week, they did find a map to be so offensive. Even this Supreme Court was like, yeah, that's too far for us. No, that map's not happening. But the Supreme Court map has literally, as you said, provided a map or a template for future, primarily red, MAGA, Southern, and other states to do the exact same thing. Hey, that's a great idea. Let's take 62% of the black people and put them into an all-black district and eliminate another black district from our state. And that's great. And then you have the mismatch. Then you got Clarence Thomas, who has the balls, the brass ones, to say in his concurrence, you know what I don't like? I don't even like that we're talking about this. This seems to be a political thing. This isn't something that we should even be getting involved with. This is something for legislators to do. This is political questions. Come on. It's only political questions when they find it unsavory that they're getting involved in it when it doesn't go in their direction, right? And so these maps have been used already in South Carolina in 2023. They will be in 2024 anyway, because they took so long, the Supreme Court, and dragged their feet that you and I are even reporting on this in the 20 whatever of May, the end of May. At the end of the term, as we're waiting on all the abortion decision, the immunity decision, the Jan 6 crime decision, the gun decision, are all going to come floating. I mean, you and I and Karen, we're going to be exhausted over the next week as all of these opinions come out, like in the shotgun approach, as they all then hightail it out to their paid junkets, primarily the Republicans, overseas and otherwise, paid by MAGA Republican donors. That's the season we're about to enter now that the term is over. And this is now just one of the ones that we're reporting on. There's a half a dozen more that you and I are going to have to do hot takes on and jump on as they get developed. And so this appearance of propriety that the justice system is fair and doesn't have its big fat thumb on the scales of justice. Again, with Alito, with his flying the flags of insurrection at both of his homes, and trying to blame the wife. You can't blame the wife for the second one. I don't know. The dog ran it up the flagpole. I mean, I don't really understand this. I know that town. That he passes that flag every day. That flag went up because he wanted it to go up. That pine tree flag. And that is him declaring to the world. Imagine if you and I rode by as we were going to the Supreme Court. We're driving down past, taking the turnpike down to New Jersey. I see that house. Okay. The Google Maps or Earth tells me that's Alito's house. I go down to his house in Virginia. I see that. And now I'm going to argue in front of him. I mean, I want an advocate at the next term to call out Alito if he's sitting there in a case and say, I have to ask something of one of the justices. Am I getting a fair shake here? Can you give me a fair shake given your political bias that's been expressed on your flagpoles? Can you? Now, I know everyone's like, oh, the decorum of the Supreme Court, the hollowed grounds. I want somebody to do that because he needs to be called out. The Senate Democrats are doing it, right? They're moving for an investigation of Alito. They want to start with a meeting with Justice Roberts about the ethics of this or the lack of ethics of this. That'll lead, because they have subpoena power. Durbin and White House are going to end up issuing subpoenas. They want to find out what happened here, how it happened. They're going to call Roberts over to talk about it because they're in charge of funding, so they have the right to do that. And then we're going to see. I know there's a censure motion that's been raised by Representative Cohen that's floating around. And then hopefully somebody will draft an articles of impeachment, even though it'll die in the House. I think it's important to the American people that it actually be debated on the floor about whether Sam Alito can get away with this or not. This brazen, just flying the flag of insurrection while he's presiding over. And the other thing Durbin and White House are asking for, Ben, is that he recuse himself right now, even though the opinion is probably written, about the 2 Jan 6 cases that have yet to opinions have yet to been issued. One, the immunity on Donald Trump still hasn't been issued yet, even though we're almost here, like a week away from the end of where they go away on vacation. And secondly, the decision on whether the obstruction of an official proceeding, which didn't have Donald Trump in the name of the case, but it applies to him, is going to apply to Jan 6th insurrectionists, or there needs to be a hearing about whether it gets stripped away from Donald Trump's DC election interference case. He should accuse himself, as should Clarence Thomas. They won't, and that's where we are.
You know, one of the things that you see consistently with these MAGA Republicans, the MAGA Republican justices, the politicians, they don't even own their own issues. They like to say, well, you know, it's just a flag that has a unique history and, you know, it has a naval connotation back during the Revolutionary War. And I'm an outdoorsman, so I kind of like pie cones. And so I'm really into, you know, just like stop with the gaslighting. And it's why it's so important, though, when the country is not knowledgeable on how courts work and what's up and what the evidence is, these MAGAs are able to execute their predatory conduct. But when you call it out, and it's an everyday, Popok, sometimes an every hour task with them, because they overwhelm you with their lies and their deceit and their gaslighting. You got to call it out each and every step of the way.
Welcome back. We don't blow smoke or sunshine on a podcast we like to call Legal AF. Join us on Wednesday and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll find out why we named it Legal AF over 4 years ago. That was Ben Meiselas and me. I do the show on Wednesdays with Karen Freeman at Nifilo, and on Saturdays with Ben Meiselas. And you can pick it up right here on the MeidasTouch YouTube channel and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.